Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix, and unfortunately, the lords at YouTube have decided that they are going to basically tell me where I can show up and do my show, even though I have more than one channel. And we know that normally on Fridays, I'm over on the far side of things. Apparently, they. Oh, hold on. Hold on. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Now I've got to do. Hmm.
I still see you on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm on YouTube, but yeah, I'm here, but this is a new experience for me with this lovely computer, so I have to deal with the sound aspect. Hold on.
Sound fine.
Just take in the ocean while you can. Yes, I'm transmitting today's show psychically. If you haven't figured that out, no, I'm having an issue with hearing myself. And since this is a new computer, I'm having to figure this thing out on the fly because I've never encountered this before. And this should be kind of interesting. Let me go into settings here. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I almost think maybe I should get off of this. I think I'm gonna switch the settings here. Give me 1 second. I got a backup plan. All right, let me try this. Let's see how this goes. All right. Yeah. I think we.
Yeah, I don't hear the echo in the background.
Okay, let's do this. Hey, I apologize for that. Here we go. Yeah, so we're just working out the kinks here. Good. You know, this is, I still hear myself talking. That kind of sucks. That really sucks. Hold on, let me just do this. Okay, so all right. Let's bring this thing forward real time. So what I did is I just really potted my volume down quite low, actually, and I can only have to hear myself in a minuscule fashion. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when I bring our guest of the day, or at least for the first hour, Jordan Foltz on. So I'll have to really focus through the strange audio, but that's okay. Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. And I apologize for the delay. I chose a lovely background today since many of you are still under house lockdown and forced incarceration for your own good, by the way. I thought I'd like to bring in a reminder of what the rest of the world looks like. And in fact, some of the more bucolic and healing places that ultimately will be open for people who apparently are not on lockdown. I don't know if you saw this yesterday, or 2 days ago, but Chris Cuomo, who is of course, quarantining at home, supposedly, was spotted at his Long Island home, which means he had to leave New York City, right? You're not supposed to leave New York City. So Chris Cuomo has a new home. He's building on Long Island. He was out there in his home and new home playing around with his kid and his wife and somebody else, and no masks. And they were clearly not practicing any kind of social distancing. So there's a set of rules. If you haven't figured this out, there's a set of rules for the people that make the rules, and there's a set of rules for everybody else. So, but I just thought I'd bring this in as a reminder today that there is a whole other world out there, and a world that we will be experiencing once again, and hopefully on our own terms. And I've got a couple of really interesting guests in store. Hour number one, we've got Jordan Foltz. He's getting ready to, he's in the on deck circle. He's taking his warm-up swings, and he'll be on here for an hour. And Jordan came to my attention through two channels. The first was Steve and Chris, and Steve and Chris have been raving about him for probably the better part of 3 or 4 months. And then they sent Steve, they were like, okay, it's not getting through to Robert, all right? So let's send Steve his video. So Steve got the video and sent it to me. I go, okay. Not that I didn't have anything against Jordan. It's just like, you know, super busy trying to run all these different things. So I watched the video and I was really blown away by the content. And then they had told me that Jordan has been doing some work with a young man, rites of passage, things that I think are really vital and important, and have really been sanitized from our culture. So we're going to talk, you know, a little bit about that. We're going to talk about Jordan. We're going to find out more about who he is, kind of. You know, he's also a quote unquote millennial, and it'll be great to kind of get a sort of into the millennial mindset in some ways. And I know that a lot of people have pretty fixed ideas about who millennials are, what they stand for, what they represent, and I think some of those things are true, and some of those things are not true. And we're going to explore that with Jordan from his own perspective and how he sees his own culture. And then in hour number two, apparently we're going to have Sharon Rose on, and Sharon is the filmmaker. She's a filmmaker. She's Jay Weidner's wife, but she's a filmmaker, award-winning filmmaker. She's also highly knowledgeable about Qigong. And we're going to talk to Sharon about her work, and we're going to talk to her about Qigong as a practice, and as a practice to keep ourselves fit and well, but also where does Qigong and energetic body flow and body systems, where does it fit in with the external energetics that we're dealing with on a daily basis? All the various Gs and RFID, and of course the big one, 5G. So we're going to share it on in hour number two. So without further ado, let me bring on the man of the moment here. Let's bring Jordan on and get to know him. And let's see. There he is. Hi, Jordan. You got your
Hey, can you hear
volume
me?
up?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to push my volume up a little bit here so I can actually hear you better and sit through my cacophony. Hold on. Let's do this. All right, this is going to be an interesting show for me as I hear the voices in my head, both yours and mine. All right. So welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well today. I've been looking forward to this. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, I sort of set the stage a little bit that you're connected with Steve and Chris and Logo Sophia through your wife, who's a publisher, currently living in
Yes.
North Carolina, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, we live in Asheville, North Carolina.
Okay. Where did you grow up? Are you originally from North Carolina or from another place?
Yeah, so my ancestors are all from North Carolina. Not all, but for many generations back from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the Piedmont, and my parents raised my sister and I in Vermont. And so I spent all of my childhood in Vermont. And I came to Asheville about 13 years ago, shortly after college. So most of my roots are North Carolina, but I have a lot of heart connection to Vermont and New England.
Cool. So were you, and again, I'm kind of sorting through some of the audio issues. So did you come from a split home? Is that right? Is that what happened?
Well, no, my parents were together most of my childhood. They split when I was about 15. So yeah,
Right.
it was a together home until the very end. Yeah.
Good. What was your upbringing like in Vermont? Were you like somebody who was into nature? Were you attracted to kind of the Pacific, the northeastern lifestyle in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad was he was educated in forestry, had a bachelor's of science in forestry, and he worked for the Forest Service for the first part of his career. He was always very connected to nature, and he raised my sister and I with those values. We spent a lot of time outdoors, hiking, camping, planting trees in the yard, and doing horticulture and things like that. So those are definitely values that were instilled in me. And when I became a teenager, I found a lot of solace in the woods and in solitude in the woods when everything kind of seemed crazy. My friendships were getting tenuous. People were making decisions and changing the way they were, and felt isolated. So I found a lot of peace in the woods, and still do. But yeah, very much part of our childhood.
So the reason why there may be a bit of a delay here is as I'm listening to you two times as we go through this. So this is double tracking.
Oh, okay.
It's going to be quite an
Okay.
interesting show today until I figure this thing out.
Okay.
So one of the things that you shared with me before you came on the show today was some of your work around the rite of passage stuff, which I want to talk about. But I want to
Yes.
specifically ask you a question about growing up in the natural setting, being a bit more wild. Did you feel as though you had the rite of passage experience in your own way, or is that kind of a gap or something that was missing for you as a young man?
There was no formal invitation to it. And so, since I've been working in rites of passage and orchestrating and delivering rites of passage programming for boys, I put a lot of thought into what those years were like for me and how I found it. And I think that most of us, I'll speak for boys particularly, I think most boys find a way to initiate themselves in their teenage years. There's a natural fire that arises. There's a natural rebelliousness. There's a natural inclination to push back on conventions, on authority, on their parents in particular. And they cope with it in different ways, and they find different ways to initiate themselves, especially in the absence of something that's formal and part of the societal or cultural fabric. And for me, it was, for some boys, it's a very social phenomenon. Like it's like getting drunk with their friends, or it's joining a gang, or it's drag racing or something. Usually it has a component of danger to it. Usually it's very much kind of an archetypal strife to push to take a look at death and take a look at danger. And it's this kind of yearning to die and be reborn. For me, it was abandoning the social fabric of high school and going to the woods alone, and thinking and writing and going in more and more extreme circumstances and for longer periods of time, going in the winter. So I was pretty individualist. I still am, but I kind of found that path during my coming of age, and it was an initiatory process that served me for my whole life. But I look at the initiation of my teenage years very much as one that happened alone, without any mentors, without any ritual, just with myself alone in the woods, scared, scared of freezing, or scared of bears, or scared of the supernatural, type situations, just putting myself in very scary, uncomfortable situations. That's what it looked like for me. And it brought a level of peace and self-knowledge to some extent. So.
Is there a particular event or particular story that was a turning point for you, and something you could actually share with people?
During my teenage years, you mean?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I mentioned, I started doing this kind of self-search through overnights in the woods. First it would be with one friend, and then it was alone. And then it would be in the winter, and it would be in the really cold winter, negative temperature winter. And then I started planning a longer trip for the summer of my 16th birthday. I think that was 2000. Summer of 2000. And it was hiking the Long Trail in Vermont. It's a 270-mile trail that runs the length of Vermont. And I walked most of it. I hurt my knee, but I walked that for, I guess it was probably three or 4 weeks. Can't remember. Mostly alone in the woods, day in, day out, for weeks on end, cooking my own food, finding water. It's not wild to the extent that like the Rockies are, or Alaska or Mexico or something like that is. So it's tame. It's New England, it's you're never that far from a house or a road. But for me, it was huge to be isolated like that, day after day after day, alone with my thoughts, alone with my fears. And after that experience, I had a level of resilience that I've carried with me since. And particularly, it's a level of resilience. It's a social resilience. I'm not subject to peer pressure. I can deal with being the outlier or the pariah in situations. Right. I don't conform, socially. There probably are ways that I conform, but it's not a pressure that I really feel, or that I submit to. And a lot of that foundation, that individualist, foundation, was established on that trip, on that journey, on that walk, and learning to get by without those conversations, without those comforts, those social comforts, without my parents.
So is that when you decided that you wanted to make that more of a part of your life, and try to find out what that physical and inner tradition was about, and explore that with other people, specifically young men?
No, I don't think I really had the inclination to give back and serve until I had my own kids, and even well into having my own kids. I had my first daughter when I was 24. I was pretty young, and it was through getting more and more involved in my community here in Western North Carolina thinking about ways to give back, that I got invited into this pre-organization that already existed and came to lead the organization and help develop it, to serve teenage boys. I was actually very afraid at first of mentoring teenage boys. They're kind of scary. I mean, it's like, for all the reasons that I just said, rebelling. They see right through bullshit. They can see someone's fears, and they often exploit it if they don't respect that person. And so being in an authority capacity with teenage boys was not something that that was easy or that I was attracted to. And it took a while to find a way to exist in that place, in a healthy and empowered and, I don't want to say comfortable way, because it's never comfortable, but to really kind of sink into it. It was more of an invitation rather than it being a spark of my own creativity. Getting involved in this work was like a call to adventure. It was an invitation from the world and the universe, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time and received an invitation to get involved, and was just continually embraced into higher levels of responsibility for this work. That's kind of how it worked. Saying yes to the universe,
I want to try to make an adjustment here with the sound. Just give me 1 second,
Mhm.
so I can figure this out. Hold on. Okay. 1 second. No. It's crazy, huh?
Hey, Jordan. Jordan.
Hey, how's it going? Yes.
You can hear me? Yeah, sorry about that.
I
He's
can.
got a new computer. He's getting all that set up. Do this. Tell me,
Okay.
you're initiating, you know, uh, young adults. What do you see the difference between one that hasn't been and when they do?
Mm. Right.
Because we don't. I mean, most people today, there is no initiation. They don't even go outside anymore to bond with nature like you did.
Yeah. So when I was talking about my own initiation, and honestly, when I was talking about my involvement in this work as an answering yes to a call to adventure,
Hmm.
what I think's at stake is that we're invited into continual cycles of initiation throughout our life, and regardless of whether it's the teenage years or later on in life, if I say no to a call to adventure, if I say no to an invitation towards self-actualization and death and rebirth and evolving into the next stage of who I am in my life, then I will very much stagnate spiritually and psychologically. And I think a lot of the times that manifests in a sense of apathy, depression, or resentment. And I don't think it's much different for teenage boys. I think one of the most critical things to the rites of passage for them, there's two. One is a confrontation with their inner thoughts and their inner capabilities, their inner strengths. They only get that through a significant level of challenge. If they're not challenged to, honestly, traditionally, a level of life or death, and we don't do that in our programming because we can't, but traditional rites of passage, the boys would have to get challenged to a point where they're if they succeeded, they lived, and if they didn't, very often they didn't come back or they died. And by getting challenged to that extent, they discovered a sense of their own capability and power and strength that they were then invited to bring back to the community. So also a wound, their vulnerability, discovering one's vulnerability and accepting it, accepting that we are mortal, that they are mortal, accepting that they are vulnerable, confronting something that's very scary and getting through it anyway, sets people up to be able to confront adversity, scary situations in their life, and not submit to cowardice. So it cultivates courage, which is a really important character trait for boys. For anybody, courage is very important. And so the rites of passage very much offer self-awareness, courage, and a sense of one's own strength. What I see in boys when they don't have this is a very high level of apathy and resignation. If I were to describe any kind of widespread epidemic when it comes to the psychology and kind of spirit of young men and boys, I think it's one of apathy. And they're hungry for adventure. They're hungry for these kinds of experiences where they're confronting danger and overcoming it and discovering what they're capable of. But they live in a very padded world, and one that discourages that kind of conduct and discourages in some ways the kind of programming that we offer in the organization that I work with and that I was directing. The culture encourages safety, which we'll obviously get into later, and elevates that to a level above anything else. And it really curbs their self-actualization and their ability to discover what they're capable of. So I think cowardice is a very, we can end up with a populace that really acquiesces to their more cowardly instincts rather than their courageous ones. I think that's a really big problem that has arisen in culture without rites of passage, and self-knowledge, a connection to the deeper part of themselves, and that vulnerability. And then third, responsibility is huge. the boys don't feel meaning in life unless they feel like they're responsible for something, unless they know what they're responsible for.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back, and I
Okay.
finally got this audio stuff squared away. Steve, thank you for jumping in.
Awesome.
I appreciate it, and
problem.
I just wish I could have. Well, I've heard some of that, and very intense and powerful stuff. And now I feel like I'm a little more locked in here. So, how did you arrive at these, I think, really essential perceptions? Like, how did that all become codified for you?
Oh man. Well, going back to my own rites of passage, and the resilience against social pressure is huge. I think that set me up to have the courage to lean into truths and things that I was learning rather than turn away from them to be accepted socially. So that set up kind of a path that was going to work for me. How did I come to arrive at these things? I don't know. I honestly, I try to be very observant of my surroundings. I've got a very metaphorical and a symbolic mind. So when I see patterns in nature or patterns in the physical world, I notice that they're reciprocated with patterns in, say, mythical teachings or religious teachings or spiritual teachings, or patterns in self-actualization and the psyche. I studied religion in college. I have a degree in religion, and I spent a lot of time thinking about the more mystical, like Gnostic aspects of particularly the Judeo-Christian tradition. That's more what I studied. I spent some time abroad in college, spent some time with these people in Morocco called the Ganawi, who are a mystical sect of Islam. They do healing and spiritual spirit invocation, essentially. So I've always had a strong connection to the unseen world and to deeper aspects of myself and spirituality, and had a lot of respect for that aspect of life and for people who devote themselves to that aspect. The collegiate approach to religion is a very postmodern one, where they're constantly trying to dissect it from a postmodernist standpoint of like, let's read this text and let's presuppose that the author had an economic interest to manipulate people through the text, rather than let's read this text to get any kind of spiritual or symbolic wisdom from it. So that's an unfortunate thing. But even though that was the kind of overtone of my college studies, I was reading them for different purposes. Right. And I think it's just thinking, honestly. It's just thinking and observing. I'm trying to give you a better answer here of how, eureka moments, but I think some people, and maybe everybody, have thought an inner dialogue and an inner conversation, and mine doesn't really shut off. And so it's constantly having these conversations with myself and finding things that work and metaphors that work and truths that work, and seeing if they play out in the real world and in nature. So
I'm familiar with the process. I get that. One of the things about Rite of Passage that I always found interesting, when I was in college, I read Man and His Symbols by Jung, and really changed my life in a lot of ways. And one of the things that Jung brought up is that we have this craving for a transcendence or a transformation at certain stages of our life. And then if we don't have a rite of passage, then the subconscious will collect experiences. So it will force us to go through it on some level. And I certainly, began to hit that wall in my late teens and early 20s. And I did have that breakthrough moment for myself, but it was nothing that was organized. In fact, it was a disorganized kind of rite of passage in some ways. And I wonder if you could speak to that, and not only just that idea that our deep psyche will bring these events into our lives, which on some level, they may even look calamitous, but also the process of how people will try to stave these things off, which I think is a whole other discussion.
Yeah. Well, I got to say that even though this is the work that I do, and even though I put a lot of thought and invested in myself personally in it, I still try to stave them off myself, because when that knock comes on the door, when that call to adventure comes, when that mandate toward growth comes, it's a dangerous thing. It always comes as a dangerous thing. It's a threat to the status quo. It's a threat to the known world. It's a threat to what Don Juan calls the tonal, you know, the seen world, the measured world, the world that is known. It's an invitation to the Nahual, to the dark world of the unknown, and it's scary. And it's a world of death and rebirth. So just want to put that out there. I'm definitely no expert in my own initiations. They always got to come and kind of clock me over the head, or be something where the benefits just obviously outweigh the risks of not answering the call. Yes, I think we all will be initiated. And if we answer no really hard, then there's huge soul prices to pay for that, and spiritual prices to pay. And I think it's maybe a karmic type situation, where some kind of karmic progression stagnates. And I was talking to Steve a minute ago, and I think it results in things like resentful attitudes and hateful attitudes and projection of dissatisfaction onto the world, and just pathological characteristics, versus channeling an energy that's really wanting to come in and flow through me. If I say no to it over and over and over again, it's like Jung said, it's getting jogged up in there. And I will say that even though we offer these rites of passage to teenage boys, what I tell them and what I tell the parents is my biggest regret, or my biggest lament with this, is that it's just a program. It's a 3-day, 2-night program. They come to us from their family systems. They come to us from a society that does not acknowledge or respect them for where they are in their lives, and does not value things like responsibility or danger or death and rebirth. And we have this sacred, mythological, very theatrical experience for them, where they're invited into this sacred theater up on a mountain with a community of men who are honoring them for what they're going through and inviting them into a deeper level of that. They go through it, they see what they're capable of, they get this glimpse into a deeper truth of their lives, and they go back. They go back to the family systems. They go back to school on Monday when this ends on Sunday. They're treated the same way in the halls, by the principals, by their bullies, by whatever. And so there's not a fabric it's not a societal wide thing. They're not treated differently. We ask the parents to treat them differently, but whether that happens, probably not. So I think even though they are invited into this program, and it is a powerful experience for them, and they get a level of mentorship that is so vital, I still think beyond it, they find ways to initiate themselves, and they have to, on a deeper level that's more congruent with the fabric of their lives, you know?
Right. So do you do follow-up work with them after that 3-day experience?
Yeah, most of them come from an ongoing mentoring program. So we have relationships with most of them. Some of them come from far and wide, and we don't see them again.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Really good stuff. So you have a video that just came to my attention through Chris and Steve, and it's about the Munchausen syndrome as applied to fascism, and I think it's quite brilliant. And what I want to do is I want to play the video in its entirety, and I think it's a really interesting kind of point of departure, because in a lot of ways, what you and I have been sort of skirting around a little bit is kind of this, sort of patriarchal or kind of masculine sort of intensification, and then ritualization, rite of passage. And what you're bringing up is something quite different. It's about the dark mother, or the devouring feminine as it relates to fascism. I'm not going to say anything more, but let's get into this, and let's have a deeper dive after I bring this up here. So find it. Okay. All right, here we go.
Okay, everybody, it's time to talk about fascism and Munchausen syndrome by proxy. So, for those of you who don't know, Munchausen syndrome by proxy is a psychological pathology that demonstrates itself in mothers, primarily. Caregivers is the clinical kind of designation for it, but most often presents itself in mothers with small children, children who can't really yet think for themselves or do anything for themselves, and for whom the mother is still pretty much the world, and they look to the mother to define the world for them. What it is when the mother is constantly projecting onto this young child pathology of some sort of sickness, sometimes a terminal illness, a condition, an allergy, some sort of a weakness or sickness that the mother, that doesn't actually exist. The child is fine, but the mother is consistently claiming to medical authorities, to the community, to her friend groups, to social networks, that her child is sick. And what's actually happening is that she is not only projecting, on a social level and a psychological level to the child, this situation, but she is very often actually innervating and harming the child to create symptoms to actually present themselves. Sometimes it is physical harm to the child. Sometimes it is lack of care or hygiene, but it is subversive efforts to get symptoms to present themselves in the child is the most extreme case of it. In less extreme cases, the mother is just claiming this pathology and creating a psychological belief system around social networks and around the child themselves that they are not well. What's the payoff for the mother is that she gains attention and gratitude from the child. Thank you for taking care of me, I'm sick, and renders that child constantly dependent on her so that her purpose is fulfilled as a caretaker and as a mother perpetually, and she doesn't have to let go of that as the child gains strength and independence. Beyond that, she gains social esteem as this mother who is got a hard situation and is dealing with adversity. So how strong she is, and additionally, resources can be gleaned from that. So people bringing food, people offering money, different programs and things like that. But primarily, what I see it as is an archetypal pathology. And what I want to talk about today is that we are entering a new age of fascism, and I hope that we can change directions and actually not go down the road that it seems like we're going down, but the road that it seems like we're going down, and that certain power systems and certain pathological individuals are inviting us to go down as a society in the United States, at least, and I think beyond the US, is into a sort of matriarchal fascism. Now, archetypally speaking, I'm talking about a fascism that is governed by energetic properties of the dark mother, the devouring mother. And Munchausen by proxy is a quintessentially devouring mother type condition and behavior. I see it as an archetypal pathology that presents itself in imbalanced individuals when they haven't fully self-actualized, and so they're retreating into the darkness of their given archetype. Now, the first round of fascism, Mussolini, Hitler, FDR, Woodrow Wilson, was very much a patriarchal type of fascism. It presented itself as commonality around purpose, commonality around spiritual direction, even though a lot of it was about extricating spirituality from the individual life and making it more of a public phenomenon. Nazism was really very big into this, and creating kind of a religious institution of the state, creating a religious style veneration of the state and a religious style devotion and self-application in regards to the state that would normally just present itself in individual spiritual pursuits. So that the father, traditionally speaking, is the one who cultivates and governs the spiritual life of the children. Archetypally speaking, the father is the solar energy that is drawing plants up out of the ground, out of their physicality, up toward spiritual self-actualization. The father in a family unit is serving a similar purpose. His purpose is to invite children into situations where they actualize themselves, where they work, where they take on more responsibility, where they're less dependent, where they are actually putting themselves at more physical risk for more spiritual safety and actualization. Now, fascism round one was a pathological father energy, so the tyrannical father presenting itself to create a fascistic social fabric that people were to live into through common purpose, common spiritual, spiritual political constitution and mindset, let's say. As it's coming back, well, fascism never really left. It kind of won, even though, I've heard it said Germany lost the war, fascism won. So when you see the direction of the United States since winning World War II, it is very much divergent. It started with FDR and Woodrow Wilson. It started with progressivism, which was the sister movement to fascism. But the U.S. has very much gone away from holding the individual sacred and individual rights sacred and freedom as sacred things to more of a mentality and a zeitgeist that is presenting, again, the government and collectivism as what is sacred and what we should be working towards. So as we're kind of coming back around to what I see as a full fascism here in coronavirus era, where we have mandated shutdowns and hyper-government control from a municipal level, state level, and federal level, mainly municipal and state when it comes to actual enforceable actions. People are getting fined for gathering in groups of 10 or more. People are getting fined for going and running errands that are not deemed essential by the government. So this is like the full expression of a new era of fascism, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get off it once we've gone down this road. The road is a road of presenting safety as first and foremost priority of our existence versus freedom. Now, Ben Franklin said, he who gives up a little bit of freedom for a little bit of safety deserves neither. And that might, in today's world, that sounds like a pretty harsh thing to say. And that just shows how far we've gone from the founding fathers' mentality and philosophy, which was one that said, unless you are willing to accept certain levels of responsibility and risk for your individual freedom, you're not going to have it. And as soon as you start to go down the road of putting safety before freedom, it's a bottomless pit. It's a devouring mother energy. Because if you start to say, I will give up a little bit of freedom for this level of safety, then who's to say that you're not still at risk in other ways once you give the first liberty up. And so then the argument can continually be made, well, you're still at risk in this way, so let us protect you more. And you're still at risk in this way, so let us protect you more, all the way until, at this point, we're locked in our houses and unable to, go about our lives. Businesses are being mandated to shut down and things like that. But this is an extreme example. It's probably temporary, but the fact that we were able to get here and that people are pretty much acquiescing to it shows that the public, the zeitgeist and the public mentality has bent the knee enough to, the devouring mother fascism to accept it. And you do see a split, which is very interesting, among more individualist type people, conservative type people, let's call them, libertarian type people, and libertarian conservative, individual liberty-oriented states, and their attitude and their response to coronavirus situation. The more leftist, the more collectivist the mentality of a municipality. So let's talk about the Bay Area, let's talk about New York City. The more heavy-handed the safety protocols and the mandated the mandated quarantines and things like that are. And then you're getting states like South Carolina and Missouri and Alabama that are just kind of like, well, we're going to leave this up to individuals to govern themselves, based on what they see is right, and to protect themselves based on their own, natural spark of self-protection. So in any case, that's an extreme example, but beyond that, even before coronavirus, and probably more importantly, what we're seeing on a political level and social level is people so political narratives relying not on gaining power and momentum through promising.
Yep. Got a freeze here. What happened? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Oh.
Around this whole island. And really just the landmass itself appears to have a created look.
Yeah, he got knocked off too.
What happened there?
I don't know. It just stopped.
Wow. Okay, hold on. That was unusual. Wow. That was very unusual. Let's see if we can get back here. Gosh, that was so good, man. Let's see if we can get Jordan back in. Calls back in here. Hopefully he comes. I don't know what happened there. Everything just got cut off. Wow. All right, let me see if I can go find that video again so we can have it locked and loaded and ready to go. I think the co-host might have something to do with that. Let's not go there.
Can you turn your volume up a little bit?
Yeah, give me 1 sec, Steve. I'm just trying to find his video one more time so we can. Oh, all right, there it is. There. Let's see if we get Jordan back in. He got bumped out. Maybe you could send him a quick email, Steve. See if we can bring him back around. I'm going to play the rest of the video for everybody so that we can finish this off. We got about 5 more minutes left. Let me just see if I can find it. Here it is. So let's see. Let's do screen share. We'll do that. There we go.
Things like freedom and potential and opportunity, which is much more of a masculine type invitation. That's a positive masculine invitation to invite youth, to invite children into their potential through opportunity rather than through force, which is the patriarchal fascist approach. And we're seeing a shift from that into this political social fabric that requires the belief in a collective pathology in order to gain power. And so this is the maternal fascism. This is the fascism of the Dark Mother. This is the Munchausen by proxy en masse. And so what we get is people in my generation, millennials, that whose purpose and whose they're predisposed toward identifying pathologies on a societal, cultural level, to the point where we're inventing microaggressions. We're inventing pathologies through the invention of this concept of microaggressions and enforcing this belief system onto groups of people. You see it a lot in the nonprofit world. You're starting to see it in certain aspects of the corporate world, but mandated trainings on microaggressions. So even though someone's living their life and they're getting along with people and they don't really care about sexual orientation or race or like any religious beliefs or anything like that, they're like fine. They're pretty open and accepting and tolerant. There's this mandated programming that no, things are not right. You're not okay. In fact, you're engaging in microaggressions, and we're going to convince you and show you how that's the case. So it's like it's a mandated retraining and reprogramming to identify or believe that we're sick, and that we need top-down protection and help from institutions of power that actually don't offer anything of value. They don't create anything of economic value or personal value or physical abundance or spiritual abundance. They're actually very vampiristic, if that's a word, when it comes to spiritual value. They very much suck people's souls and make them angry and resentful. But yeah, so rather than that, it's this enforced programming that there's something wrong with us, that there's something wrong and we should be mad, and that we should elect people in power and continue to perpetuate this by electing people that are going to deal with these situations as though they could be dealt with in the first place. They're inventions. And so I started with Munchausen by proxy on an individual level. It is a real psychological pathology and a phenomenon. And at the same time that this is expressing and presenting itself on a more social, macrocosmic, macroscopic level, political, social level, Munchausen by proxy, it is proliferating in the individual family level too. We're getting a lot more split families, a lot more fatherless homes, and Munchausen by proxy on a real literal level presents itself most often in a fatherless home. Now, in order to preserve the dependency and in order to preserve her worth as a mother, in order to preserve the caregiver archetype and prevent the child from becoming independent and well, in really extreme cases, mothers will go so far as to overly nurture the child with its condition by perpetuating the condition to the point of death. So sometimes children are actually killed by the mother in her manipulative obsession of perpetuating their illness. It's the same thing on the societal level. So the desire with perpetuating these false pathologies on a societal, social, personal level, saying this person is has that microaggression, we're oppressed because we're not guaranteed, all of our bills to be paid by the government, or something. Like there's something wrong because the government's not paying all my bills, or there's something wrong because this state is not choosing to quarantine all of its people and put them in cages, essentially, right? The state, the fascist state, the Munchausen by proxy possessed fascist state will continue to perpetuate and create and project societal pathologies to elevate its own control until society, or the child, society is the child on a macroscopic level when you blow the Munchausen by proxy out to a more public metaphysical level, until society's dead. So until nothing is actually working. Because when things work, when society is healthy, the maternal fascist, the dark mother, the maternal fascist is purposeless. She's dissatisfied. She's not there to protect. There's nothing to protect. Society's well. People are prosperous. People are good. So we need to break it. We need to break it hard. And you're seeing that in overdrive right now with the coronavirus. So there's a real problem, I think. I haven't known anybody who's gotten sick, but it's probably a real problem, a real disease. And so it's like this devouring mother has gone into crazy overdrive. Now's her chance. Now's her chance to truly break things down so that she is so needed. I'm going to break your legs, and I will feed you chicken soup while you are sick in bed, and I will expect your gratitude for the soup, right? So that's that. Munchausen by proxy, the dark feminine, a new fascism for 2020.
All right, looks like we have Jordan back in here. Let's bring him back on. what is this? Let's get out of here. Exit now.
There you go.
See you later. Yeah. See you later. Okay. There he is. Hey, sorry about that, Jordan.
I've never had great internet access connection here at my house, so it might have been my fault.
No, I don't think it was you. I think it was my my co-producer, not Steve, but I think it was Jasper, my co-producer. So I'm going to put that one on. Jasper's my cat, by the way. I think he put his paw
Okay.
on the keyboard. So that was just a fucking brilliant video. That thing it's got to go viral. I think it should be a huge share. It's deeply insightful and very, very, very informative. You know, when I was watching that video, the first image that popped in my head was Christine Whitmer, who's the governor of Michigan. Have you been following what's going on up there?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, and
yeah.
You know, I mean,
I was emboldened by I was emboldened by the demonstrations whenever that was yesterday or the day before. I mean, that brought me some joy. I'll say that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, that popped into my head. I mean, Christy Whitmer is the face of this sort of Munchausen by proxy fascism, to the point where, you know, she's not even letting the little boys and girls go out inside and play. Right. I mean, it's brutal. And the other thing that popped in my head, if you want to see a cinematic version of the Munchausen syndrome in action, it's The Sixth Sense, the movie The Sixth Sense with M. Night Shyamalan.
Okay.
Director. Have you seen it?
I have not. No, I don't know about it.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to tell you the ending as a spoiler, but the Munchausen piece plays a significant role in that movie.
Yeah.
And I was also thinking that as a strategy, it is so insidious, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
If you have sort of, you know, I mean, on some level, like Trump is not the enemy. Trump is like the obvious enemy, but he's really not the enemy. Because when you have the obvious enemy, you can shake your fist at the obvious enemy and say, this is tyrannical, this is horrific, you know, we've got to push back against this. But if you push back against the qualities or the sort of the factors that you were, you know, minutely detailing there, what are you pushing back against? You're pushing back against the feminine, your own mother. How can you do this? How can you cross this line? You're disrespectful. You're disrespecting the rest of us. You know,
Absolutely.
Get in line here. Get back in your house.
Yes.
I mean, it is a brilliant strategy of control. Totally brilliant strategy of control. And also this idea that they're putting, you're putting your well-being above others. You selfish son of a bitch,
Exactly.
right? You know, get back in line. And so then you have, then you have the shaming culture, and you know, next door Nancy, who's gonna have the phone app and decide to, you know, call up the local PD. And now you have Munchausen by proxy and proxy, double proxy. So I mean, I mean, it's a totally brilliant strategy, and you got to take your hands off to these people for systems of control. Totally brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I think it takes an immense amount. It takes an immense amount of what's the word? Rational patience and commitment to see ideas through to take something like this on. Like archetypally speaking, it's the positive masculine that can counter and control and temper the dark feminine. So it's the qualities of being able to be exposed, exposing oneself, speaking rationally, speaking ideas and following through with them, having the patience rather than getting triggered and going into like a masculine rage, which is I do, you know, internally, I feel that way when I see this happening.
Right.
But to stop, take a deep breath and bring on the positive masculine to wrap rationality and break this down for what it is. That's what can temper it. And it's hard to do because I think the dark feminine and the dark masculine get in this kind of tit for tat back and forth, and they both just blow each other up. And that is kind of what we're seeing. It's a very difficult thing to deal with. And in the real world, it's a difficult thing to deal with. I have a lot of friends, and me personally, I've been through some very difficult custody type situations. And this can really rear its head in custody battles. It really can. It's the dark masculine can come up for men and the dark feminine can come up for women in custody disputes. And it can be a very disorienting thing. But I've seen it happen a lot. But this particular thing, projecting a unwellness or an unsafeness on a child in order to gain power over a situation in a really immediate parental home, you know, in a very literal sense. And the only way to deal with it is to be patient and to speak to it openly, patiently, rationally for what it is, and hope that people will see the truth.
Well, I think that's a really broad-minded attempt to hold some space and give people an opportunity to have a more objective and rational point of view. I'm not sure everybody's ready for it, and I'm not sure everybody can receive it. I think we're just set to different frequencies. You know, we're just set as I think as human beings. I don't think I like to think that there's one universal channel that we're all dialed into, but my experience says that's not the case. You know, my experience is that a lot of people are tuned into just complete and utter noise, or complete and other, or their signal is blocked and you just can't get to them. And, you know, unless life brings them a tremendously difficult circumstance to break through, in many cases, they just don't get it. They're not going to be able to be tuned in and dialed in. So I think it's a really, really good approach in order to do that. You know, one of the things I've been talking about for a while now is the shift from the Dionysian to the Apollonian. And it feels like, you know, while there's this kind of really kind of dark feminine sort of fascism that's sort of being played out, I've also noticed, you know, like in kind of a micro way or smaller way, you know, people like this guy Roosh V, who, I don't know if you know about Roosh V at all. He was one of these guys that like figured out how to have sex with anybody, you know, all these different sex manuals. He was really manipulative around women. And then, you know, the light went on in his head and he's like, this is not a good life. I'm being manipulative. And he walked away from it all. And he decided that he was going to take a different path. His books were very, very successful. He's not getting any money from us. He did a total restart. Owen Benjamin is another guy, Hollywood actor, comic, decided he was going to break away. So I've been watching this kind of more masculine movement towards the Apollonian sort of consciousness, this dawning, you know, Stoicism is kind of making a comeback. You know, there are people who are very, very inspired by Stoicism. So that, you know, these are some of the things that are kind of taking place underneath this other program that I think you really articulately described. And then just one other thing, I just wanted to follow up on your thing around custody and the courts. And in most cases, the courts are completely rigged against men, And there are cases where women do have some challenges and issues, and they're not dealt with fairly. But my experience is that it's really tilted in the other direction. And so even with the court system, right? And with co-parenting, there's no 50-50. One parent's going to get 51%. And in many cases, the custodial parent winds up being the mother. So even that is slightly tilted. And I've got my own thoughts around that with, you know, like secret societies and kind of Freemasonic ideology injected into the course. That's a whole different discussion. But that's totally brilliant what you put together. And here we are in the midst of this kind of grand moment of virtue signaling, which is also, I think, part of this thing. You know, where do we go from here? What are your thoughts? How do we deal with this nanny state with combat boots?
Well, I like highlighting these things that are naturally going on. So I think as long as we're human, then there are a lot of checks and balances that are put in place within us to recognize and be drawn to truth. What I've really, in my rites of passage work, what I've really come to love is teenage energy. I mean, it's a pain in the ass to deal with when I'm trying to reel them in, but that energy of rebelliousness and sticking your finger up at the system is so necessary. It is so important. That is the biggest check on fascism that we could ever hope for, is teenagers getting the indoctrination from the elders and saying, you know what, no thanks, you don't know what you're talking about, old man. And there's a huge sacrifice to it too. They don't get the wisdom, or they don't get the traditions or the elders or something like that. But my generation, I am a millennial, and I'm one of the older millennials. We have succumbed very, very collectively to a mindset of one, collectivism, and political correctness, and systems of thought that most millennials don't realize are very manipulated and kind of a level of programming. It's the woke paradox. You call yourself woke, but really it's this kind of sense of programming that's been downloaded into you since we were kids, and especially in the college years. So now that we're kind of coming into a generational cycle of authority, we're the teachers now. We are the directors of nonprofits and programs. We are rising up in the corporate world. We're creating this fabric of mandated wokeness, which the youth are against. So the teenage boys these days, and I feel for them, again, going back to the apathy piece, like there's this crushing apathy that I sense with these boys that is just so sad. But what I do admire is that they see through the facade and the contrivedness of virtue signaling and wokeness. A lot of them do, because for them, like let's talk about the hippie generation or the boomer generation. They felt oppressed by the 1950s dappered up, buttoned up, like America's great, let's go to work and have a nuclear family and everything's fine. They felt the oppressiveness of that and rebelled against that in a whole nother way. My generation is that for this new generation in another way, through wokeness, virtue signaling, and political correctness. So where do we go from here? I think that we can have some faith that as long as we're human and these archetypal realities are written into us, which I think are divine, then we're going to find ways of checks and balances. The big fear is becoming not human, is microchips and silicon and things like that. And but beyond that, I do think that it's important to speak to these things. For me, my method of dealing with this kind of stuff, I live in a very progressive town and I work in progressive industries, and I don't have anybody who thinks like me in my social circles. Really, I don't. And the only way that I find it possible to talk about these things with folks who I think are more plugged into collectivist mind control, I don't want to be insulting, but folks who are taking the New York Times and CNN as the gospel, is to not, I don't mention names. I speak only in terms of ideas. I don't talk about Trump. I don't talk about Bill Gates. I don't talk about Fauci. I don't mention specific entities. I just talk about thoughts, patterns, metaphors, logic. I work in the realm of logic, and that's what works for me. It's not going to work for everybody. But what I've noticed is that when you start getting too specific about contemporaneous things that are happening, people shut off and they get defensive and they can't hear it. But when I talk more on the eternal realm in terms of patterns, cycles, metaphors, archetypes, energies, it doesn't matter what camp somebody's in. They kind of get, it speaks to them. They can get the Munchausen by proxy. They can get the dark mother. They can get the brave new world idea. So to speak of those in more of an eternal and non-specific, well, specific, but non-specific in the sense of I try not to incriminate specific people or parties. I do incriminate progressivism pretty hard, but that just comes with the territory. So that's my approach, and I don't know how much success I have, as far as where we go from there. What I want to do another video on soon is establishing a threshold. So what there's like the boiling the frog phenomenon, right? So we start with 100% liberty, 100% freedom. And then let's just say, let's zoom it into the last 25 years. Let's say in 1999, we had 100% freedom. I know we didn't. 2001, you get the Patriot Act. Say that cuts off 25% freedom. You've given up your due process. You got Gitmo Bay, you got surveillance. Now we're at 75% of the original, which is a new 100%. And then another thing passes. So, and then it's another 25%, and you got 50% of the original, but it's a new 100%. And so while we have what we have now, rather than waiting for it, waiting to create a threshold, I think it's really important for people to create a threshold now of where do I draw the line?
Right.
And by drawing the line, it's like, where do I not do what I'm being told to do at the sake of potentially being incarcerated, or whatever it might be. Yeah. And I hate to put it in those terms, but you know, and go to extremes, but I don't know what the population of Germany was in Nazi times. Maybe it was like 12 or 15 million. I don't know, but let's say it was 50 million. I mean, and half of those people being pretty bought in Nazis. I mean, how do you get seven? It didn't happen overnight, you know? So
well, they were
where's the threshold?
Right? They were demoralized.
Yeah.
They had to go through the Weimar Republic, hyperinflation, you know.
Sure. Yeah, there you go.
So they were absolutely demoralized. They were ready.
It's like,
they were ripe for the picking at that time.
Yeah. So for me, let's say within the realm of possibility, it is within the realm of possibility that DSS would come to my home, or the WHO, or some agency, National Institutes, I don't know who it would be, come to my home to forcibly vaccinate me and my kids. Let's just say that's within the realm of possibility on the road we're going down.
Yeah.
I wouldn't let that happen. So that's one threshold that I've already established. I'd be at the front door, and it'd be an over my dead body kind of a situation.
Right.
And I think it's important for people to know what that line is for them, because if they wait, then it's not going to be that much further than where they already are. And they'll be like, well, maybe I should just take this job as a prison guard because there's nothing else going on. And, you know, it's not that much different than what I'm doing now. Right. So take the 100% freedom and rationality and like, you know, like freshness and morality that you have right now, and say, I wouldn't go beyond this point, and then don't go beyond it, I guess. Right. That's my personal
I think that's a good place to kind of have a discussion around, you know, where's the line? Where's the line? Is the line having somebody take your temperature before you go into a store, right? Because that's that is a line, and that line is coming.
Exactly.
Is it having to take a test, right? Is it having to take a corona test? You know, that line is coming.
Right.
You know, and some of these lines are going to be so imperceptible. You know, is having a cell phone going to keep you in the loop in a way that is going to have people track you, track your body temperature, report back to whatever kind of mandatory piece of software you have to download? I mean, so where's your line with your cell phone? Do you ditch your iPhone? Do you ditch your Android? Will you take just a little cheap Nokia so you can stay in touch with people? I mean, these are, I think, really important points. By the time they get to your door, you're pretty much toast. So you better find your line before that door moment. And we're at those demarcations where you know, your cell phone, the mask, and the temperature, and the test, the mask, temperature, and the test, all part of your Munchausen by proxy. You know, we care about you. We care about other people. You know, you got to do this. If you don't do this, you know, you're a pox on society. So yeah, find the line sooner than later. I think that's what Jordan is basically advocating here.
I think also it's important to understand on a rational level that it's impossible for the government to care about you. They can't. It's a bureaucracy. It's spiritually, emotionally impossible for there to be a real human connection amongst bureaucracies to any one of ours well-being. It's an ideological thing that's said, but the government cannot love you. And it certainly can't care about my self-preservation to the degree that I do. It certainly can't care about my kids' self-preservation to the degree that I do. And I think that's just a really important thing for everybody to understand, because a lot of these conversations take as a premise that the government does care or can, that it even can.
Right.
Exactly. And my piece is that it can't.
And their ideological evil twin, the corporation, is basically promising the same thing, and they don't care either, right?
Right.
They have a more commercial version of care, but they don't care, They clearly they don't. And that's not to say that some companies that are small companies or mom and pop companies, whatever, don't care about their employees. They do. Unfortunately, they're on the way to extinction right now, and that's just the cold part.
They care through relationship.
Yeah, they do care.
They have real relationships with real people. That's the difference. Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your generation, the millennials. And so I was doing the math on when you were born. So you were born in 1984, which you shared with me earlier. So right around 1994, 95, 96, we've got really very dark hip hop, gangster rap is coming onto the scene. Kurt Cobain dies, but there's still the sludge of grunge. And then there's this whole kind of like really kind of dark, kind of depressing, alt punk sort of emo stuff, and a lot of heroin floating through that scene. And I thought about what would be, because I was obviously I was in my 30s then, but I was in the music business kind of around that stuff. But it was like, what would it be like to have grown up with that? See, I grew up with punk rock. I grew up with the Sex Pistols. I grew up with the Clash. Very different kind of energy, like big, big fuck you kind of energy. By the time we get to Nirvana and post Nirvana, it's not really that. It's more inward. It's much more morose. And it's in a lot of ways, it's much more of a death cult, right? So rebellion becomes turned inward, not outward. And it becomes this kind of death cult situation. I'm just wondering what your situation was like growing up, and how you were listening to music, and how that played a role in your life.
Well, that's a really interesting distinction that you draw, because I think a big part of I think that maybe it was a big gift to me individually, because what caused me to turn away from my friend groups, high school can be a time of immense conformity. And I think it's a time where a lot of the times for people, it gets established for them, or they establish for themselves whether they're going to be a conformist or not. And when the gangster rap hit the scene, 1994, 1995, 1996, I was 12 and 13. So I was coming out of middle school and going into high school. And my rural white Vermont friends ate it up. They loved it. And they emulated the image that it,
That was their punk rock.
Yeah.
Gangster rap was their punk rock.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And they emulated the image that it was creating, which was one of, so they started to present themselves as, they started calling our girlfriends bitches and hoes. Right. They started, just, drinking 40s and smoking weed. I mean, everybody, I guess, does that in high school. That doesn't really matter or count. But it was this nihilistic rebellion. It wasn't a rebellion against authority. It wasn't a rebellion against any kind of specified fabric of the adult systems. It was not inviting them into creating anything with that energy. It was resigned. It was nihilistic. It was the very aesthetic of it was not caring or giving a shit about anything.
Right.
And so that was a big turnoff for me. I didn't trust it. I didn't trust it from the start. And it's not just gangster rap, but that was just kind of the culture. You kind of described it, of where people were going. And I thought, I just didn't trust it. There was some kind of childlike spark in me that was like, that, I don't want to do that. And so I protected myself, but also divorced myself from the social circles, through, as I already described before. So that's kind of what that was like for me. It was probably a big spark in me having to find my own way. I was listening to, it took me a while to find my own music, because what was available, at least what I saw as being available, wasn't that intriguing for me. I liked alternative rock. I liked Kurt Cobain. I liked Nirvana. But I kind of reverted back to a lot of like 60s music, honestly, when I was a late teen, you know, Grateful Dead and Bob Dylan, a lot of Bob Dylan. And when I went to college on the West Coast, there was a lot of kids out there who had more underground hip hop exposure from the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And that was pretty cool. I liked that a lot. And
Blackalicious.
then I discovered jazz and world music.
Yeah.
Who's that?
Blackalicious. That was one of those Bay Area
Yeah.
hip hop groups.
Right.
They were terrific. Yeah. They call it backpacker hip hop. Yeah. Good stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
Del the Funky
Yeah.
Homo Sapien and all that. It was great. It was really good music.
Right.
Very, very cool time. So what was, I want to talk a little bit about nonconformity, because I think this is a really principal piece for you, and not really the spirit of rebellion, but a real spirit of authenticity and sovereignty. And I've talked about nonconformity and how most people will shy away from it because for a number of different reasons. It'll be shunned socially. They lose the protection of the herd. It's just not something that people migrate towards. Being lonely, being an outcast. I mean, these are very intense and sort of intrinsic qualities that being a nonconformist has. But what's interesting, and I'd love your take on this, is that during the 60s, nonconformity was celebrated. I mean, nonconformity was a religion, right? And now we've shifted from that. And you talked a little bit about that. Now we've shifted from that, and it's become the opposite. And conformity has really become this kind of celebrated cultural value. You know, can you just speak a little bit about sort of the intensity and the trials of nonconformity, but also the reward for being a kind of a conscious nonconformist?
Yeah. So I want to invite. So there's this book that really transformed the way that I see history, and it's called Generations, and it was written in the early 90s by, man, I can't remember the guys. Howe is the last name of one of the guys. It's called Generations, but I think it was the first big look at generational cycles, defining the millennials, defining the boomers, defining these generations, and the way that the book. So I invite everybody to read this book. It's brilliant. It's long. It's about 800 pages, but it defines American history as in cycles of generational cycles of 4 generations. And it starts with an idealist generation, and it's 22-year birth period. And then it goes into a reactive generation. And then it goes into a civic, and then it goes into an adaptive. And with our current generational cycle, if you're going to play into that mold and that kind of model that they created, the millennials are the civic generation, and the boomers are the idealistic. And what a civic generation does is they're very collectivist generations. If you look at them throughout American history, the last one was the GI generation. It was the World War II vets. It was the 1950s guys. They succeeded at World War II. It was all about doing things right. You lived a certain way. The suburbs were created during that period, these ticky-tacky homes. It's a collectivist generational cycle. And within each generation, there's always people who are outliers, who are pariahs of the general zeitgeist of whatever that generation is. And I'm definitely one with the millennials. So I don't think that most millennials would really like to be called conformists, or like to really even like entertain the thought that they might be. However, they are. It's a very conformist generation. It's calling for unity. It's calling for collectivism. They're really big on socialism. They're really big on people being compelled to be the same. They're big on these educational pieces, which I talked in that video, trainings for political correctness.
Right.
They're very careful with what they say so that it's a politically correct thing to say, so that it's a woke thing to say. Companies that are being run by millennials are very sure that their messaging is congruent with the mold that's being approved of, the politically correct mold. But the word conformity is not one that they're going to be too friendly with, because it's been a maligned word. It's a word that millennials don't really want to ascribe themselves to. But so yeah, the cost of being a nonconformist is that there's a certain freedom of discussion. So, I work I work very much I've worked in media. I've worked for the local alt news weekly here in Asheville. I wrote for them, and I did sales for them, and I worked in the nonprofit world. And there's a pretty cohesive fabric in both of those worlds of like-minded people who are politically correct. And in those circles and in the workplace there, I just kind of have to not share what I think a lot of the times. And so that's a cost. There's a certain social cost and isolation that comes from it. But the payoff for me, at least, and I don't know that maybe everybody feels this way, they're in alignment with their, like, you know, divine spark. But I don't feel like I've ever betrayed myself. I don't feel like I keep quiet in certain situations. I do. But I don't do or say things that I know are lies to who I am, what I believe, and so that's a much greater payoff. I mean, I believe that I have a soul, and not everybody believes that the soul is a thing.
Right.
And if you don't believe the soul's a thing, I guess a herd thing.
I don't think everybody has a soul, by the way, but that's just me. Go ahead.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
Yeah.
If you don't believe you have a soul, I'll use I statements here. This is one of our things we do with the boys. If I didn't believe I had a soul, it may make sense to me to be part of the herd. Why not? Why wouldn't I do that? Why wouldn't I get the maximum social payoff and power from the time that I'm living if there's no internal trade-off, no divinity, there's no real true way of being or true way of thinking that I should be living into or living toward. It's all just a matter of like what exists in the time being and manipulation and just make the best of it. Right. But I do believe I have a soul, and with that belief, there's a different, I consider it a higher calling, which is to be congruent with what I would describe as divine order, nature, the way that the forests are and the way that animals operate, and taking care of the people that I'm responsible for, and just paying attention to those kinds of things and living in those, you know, according to those truths. And I will say that with respectful communication, I'm able to maintain a lot of friendships with people who don't agree with hardly anything that I have to say or that I think. So I try to come at things from a place of love in that case. But yeah, for me, I'm an introvert, so there's not as many sacrifices. I guess if I was an extrovert nonconformist, perhaps I'd exploit it more to my own, like, I think Trump might do that. You know, Trump's kind of like he's like an extrovert nonconformist, and he just exploits it to get more attention for himself, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So, and also being in those situations, I think probably creates some kind of tension and internal pressure for you that allows you to cook on these things too, right? You know, like
yeah.
Interesting stuff. All right. Well, why don't we bring Steve back on here, and let's see what Steve has to say, and see if we have any questions from Chatlandia. Hey, Steve.
Gavin, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh man, so much. Let me think real quick.
Steve, I'm going to buy you like a Thor's hammer, so you can, like, when it's time for you to speak, you'll have the Thor hammer, and that way I think it'll bring the lightning to the moment. I'm going to send that to you through Amazon.
I've had a lot of thoughts, you know, through this whole thing, and I'm just trying to think of where I want to start with this. Well, one, you know, you were talking about souls. Jordan, have you come across someone that just couldn't make the transition once they went through the initiation? Or there's some people that are just, you know, neutral and can't, you know, they don't have that spark to work with. Do you ever come across that?
You're talking about with the teenage initiations, yeah?
Yeah. Because, you know, they.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We've had, yeah, there have been some boys who've gone home. And I think with some of those situations, because they were on drugs, and so they had this really heavy blanket over the spark.
Too much.
They'd gotten really used to blanketing the spark to medicate themselves, to comfort themselves for whatever they're dealing with.
Mhm.
And I think a couple of other ones just had gotten so beaten down in their lives that they had no curiosity about the spark,
Mhm.
or were very, very removed from the curiosity about that spark in themselves. And even with a group of men authentically, powerfully, compassionately inviting them and bearing witness to like what we saw in them, the beauty and the potential and the uniqueness that we saw in them.
Yeah.
It wasn't, the curiosity was dead. The curiosity was dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's happened a couple times.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Yeah, well, what I think about, I go back to not Animal Farm, Brave New World, and I've heard so
Mhm.
much about that. Society is being engineered. We down here are being engineered for, the elite society to be in a Brave New World, from the vaccines to autism to everything. And you're talking about music, and each decade was it all builds together. It all builds together. And one thing that I see is it's a perversion, not just the music, but just the group and the love and all the commercials. It's a perversion of what it should actually be in the first place. It's a false offering or something. So it sounds right, it looks right, and so everybody dives into it. But there's like you said, if you're going to actually do the work, there's some struggle and sacrifice and tears and challenge. And if you haven't done that, well, with the initiation stuff, but also with your own shadow work with the archetypes, then it's not, you don't really own it. It's not yours. It doesn't come easily.
Yeah.
What was the other?
Let me jump in here real quick, because I wanted to ask this question to Jordan. I think it
Uh-huh.
kind of piggybacks on what you're talking about, Steve. You were talking about being woke and wokeism, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like being woke or wokeism is like a simulacra of awakening. It's like they're going to create this program, and they say, here it is.
Yes.
Here's what it's like to be awake, right? But it's not really being awake when they're being initiated into this simulacra of awareness, and it's not. And I think that's what Steve is kind of getting to here. What are your thoughts on that?
Gotcha. Thoughts on that? I was woke. I went to college. I went to a very progressive liberal arts college, and having intellectual, interesting, being in an environment that seemed to embrace discovery and learning was so refreshing. I looked up to my professors so much, and I had no idea that there was a certain level of indoctrination going on just from being in that environment. But I would have considered myself, I was woke for many years, definitely after college and up until very recently, until I started to just admit the way that I actually feel and think about things. I've shouted people down. I spent years shouting people down, thinking that I was woke. Only now can I see just how much of a program it was, those emotional triggers, being triggered into yelling something at somebody, xenophobe, or whatever it was, just based on an issue that had been put into me to say that for. I don't think I was a bad person, but it was a mental program for sure. So I think it's a tragedy. I think it's very sad, and it's dangerous. It's a very dangerous thing, to have vast amounts of people programmed toward anger and shaming and kind of witch hunting type mentality for pre-designated triggers. But I think it is very interesting that, that it could be a substitute for something else that's missing. Going back to the rites of passage conversation, a substitute for a deeper level of self-knowledge, a substitute for exposure, wokeness. Yeah, very curious. I'll think on it a lot more.
Yeah, and especially at that time, because, at 21, 22, I'm an astrologer. That's a big Saturn cycle. It's the second Saturn square. So, people are open, right? This is the time where, Saturn's cutting against the grain, and you can really make a lot of progress during these times. And so during that time, it's like, okay, we're gonna pour this into these individuals, right? We're gonna pour this into them so that when this time comes and they're really kind of ripping away from another layer of the social fabric, we're going to be replacing what they're being ripped away from. And I wanted to ask you this question, because you use the word indoctrinated. Now, do you think that your indoctrinators were aware that they were indoctrinating you?
I do not, with my situation, with my curriculum, no. I think there are certain curricula that are far more geared toward indoctrination. I had a bunch of postmodernist professors studying religion. They didn't know how to talk about it except from the standpoint of let's talk about how this potential author wanted to manipulate his, let's say author J of the Old Testament wanted to have an economic impact on his audience. Let's see what power he was trying to leverage for himself. That was just how they were taught to study texts. Right. I don't think that they knew it was an indoctrination piece, at all. I do think there are, and look, that was back in the early 2000s. Things are at a whole different volume now. I think when at college campuses, I think it's at a pretty crazy level right now. And I think there are more folks who are aware that they're indoctrinating, and they think it's a good thing. They think it's important and necessary, but I think they're aware of it more. Yeah.
Ain't no indoctrinating going on now. Those schools are closed. So the program is shut down temporarily for the time being. Hey, Steve, we got any questions from Chatlandia?
Oh, I don't know. Well, I'm going back and forth. There's been a lot of good conversations. Everybody's loving it. I remember one was, can you talk about what it looks like when men are expressing the dark feminine? You touched on that a little bit.
Was that from Joe by any chance?
No, actually, Jennifer Fitzgerald.
Okay, Jennifer. Okay, cool. Go. Can you repeat it again? Men expressing the dark feminine? Is that what you said?
Yeah. What does it look like when men are expressing the dark feminine?
I think that it looks similar to when women are expressing it. Honestly, I think it's being possessed by the anima. I think it's a victim mindset. I think it's playing into the game. It's a very seductive game. Well, once somebody starts playing the game of I'm the protector, I'm protecting these victims over here, these vulnerable children, people, whatever it is, things, situations. It's a seductive thing to say, no, I'm protecting them. I'm the protector. I care about the disenfranchised. I care about the da. So I think that there are disenfranchised. There's oppression in the world. It's a real thing. It's a real thing for sure. But to not be cognizant of the avenues of empowerment, but to ingratiate the relationship of being the helper or the savior, I think is kind of how men can play into it. And I think there's a different aspect of the dark feminine that men can express for sure. That isn't necessarily the devouring mother, which is being kind of an attention suck. So lack of courage, lack of self-confidence, constantly needing reassurance, is a different aspect of being possessed by that, I think. But yeah, the devouring mother one, I think is very much in control of a lot of men these days. And I don't know if I can say it much better than that.
Real quick, I want to just follow up on this, Steve, because it has to do with women.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about men a lot. So there are a lot of women in the chat room who are really strong, independent, very authentic, very driven by truth, and most of them, if they're in the chat room, are nonconformists, say that. So how do you view this from the feminine psyche or the female psyche? Because now women are kind of even rebelling against this thing that they are connected to biologically, archetypally, right? There's a whole other challenge and a whole other kind of mindset for women to kind of break free from this as well. Have you dove into that at all?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. How can you?
Yeah. So the
Can you
question
ask it
is,
again?
so we're talking about this devouring mother, this thing that's theoretically, right, feminine, right? It is a dark feminine energy that's based on control, and it's based on this idea of safety and security. With women, that is a natural response to life, right? That is in many ways where they come from. And for a woman to rebel against this Munchausen syndrome as fascism, they're confronting their own kind of spiritual and biological coordinates. And how do they kind of reset and move away from something like this, which is really in a deep way, in a more positive way, part of who they are?
Well, I think it's nature. Like, I really think that, and I said this before, I really think through observing nature, we can find answers to a lot of these questions. Nature, unless it's in captivity, or unless it's some pathological circumstance that's been presented to animals, trees, animals, nature, they can teach us how to do these things. And in nature, mothers can be oppressively protective of their young, of what they're responsible for, of what they've created, of what they're stewarding, until it's very clear that they can do it for themselves. And then they have the wisdom, divine spark, to say, go fly from the nest, go hunt your first rabbit, whatever it is. And so it's written to nature. So by observing those things, I think we as humans who are crafty and clever and come up with systems that we delude ourselves with, can fall back into more congruent ways of being. So is still nurturing, to nurture and to take care of something and to bring safety to something is not the dark feminine. It's to do that to the level of hurting it, and to do that to the level where it's at the expense of its own actualization and empowerment. So we do things with an eye towards service and empowerment of what we're stewarding and protecting. It's the same with the masculine. The tyrannical father is abusive, like creates slaves out of people through physical oppression and force. Says my internet connection's unstable. I don't know if I'm breaking up here. But so the tyrannical father is bringing this solar warrior-like energy, but for the purpose of enslavement and disempowerment, not service.
Right.
The positive masculine, the positive father, needs to invite people into a sense of exposure and vulnerability, children, things that he's responsible for, things that he's stewarding, things that he's serving, but he is doing it for their own empowerment. The dark father, it happens a lot between fathers and sons. When the son starts to overshadow his dad in certain ways, or he gets to be better at his dad than something, or maybe smarter than his dad in something, dads very often want to snuff that out. They're like, you don't know, boy, but that's the dark masculine rearing its head. But to say, okay, he does have this to offer, and to be able to empower him into that is the positive masculine. It's the same with the feminine. So to trust the instinct toward protection, to trust the instinct toward compassion and nurturance, as something that's beautiful. I mean, in fact, that's to me, that's the divine spark that keeps everything together. That's what the foundation of everything should rely on, is the maternal instincts toward protection and nurturance. But to also be aware that it can become pathological, and to always have an eye to, how am I not needed? And to allow space for growth and evolution in those ways that you're not needed, in the children or in whatever it is. How can this flow on itself? Is there a way for this to be more self-actualized and self-expressed? It's keeping tabs on oneself. That's how the dark archetypes are regulated in either circumstance.
Good answer, thanks. Steve, got anything else? Any comments or any other questions?
Yeah. Speaking of that, if whether it's the mother or the father, if they're healthy enough, then they don't need to go dark and feed, by doing something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
let me think. There's 4 survival archetypes. Archetypally, the prostitute, the saboteur, the child, and the victim. So we've been talking about the child and the victim. The victim plays the blame game, and the child needs to not be dependent and grow up. So I've always heard that those are the lessons that you need to pass in order to graduate to being able to pass your other lessons. Because we all have our spiritual backpack, to realize our gifts. So it's really great work that you're doing, and no better time than now to do it. I mean, everything's going crazy, but we still have people like you, doing the right work and planting good seeds. So that's awesome.
So Jordan, you got any plans to write a book? I think you're book worthy here.
Thanks, man. Yeah, plenty of plans to write one. Plenty of books percolating in my mind. But for now, I'd like to, I write. I'm still writing for a paper in town, a different paper. So I do some writing there, and I've got many more ideas for these YouTube videos. It's a very convenient way to express some ideas. But if I wrote a book, I would attempt to write a fiction book and encode some of these things into story, because I think they're so powerful when they're written into story. I don't know that I have the credentials to write a nonfiction book. I don't think anybody would pay attention to it.
Well, do a few more of those YouTube videos and you might change a few minds. I know a good publishing company in North Carolina, by the way. They might be able to, Asheville.
Yeah, I do too.
I think they might be able to help you out there.
Yeah.
Jordan, it's been great. Let's have you back on again sometime. Just a real blessing to have you on the show, and just a breath of fresh air. So cool. Keep doing your thing. Okay.
Thank you, my friend. It's been good to talk to both of you guys.
Yep. Thank you so much.
I'll put the link to your YouTube channel in the show page so people can go there, click on and subscribe and keep following your work. So take good care.
Awesome.
And
thanks, Rob.
Yeah. See you later. Bye for now.
Thanks, Steve. See you guys.
There we go. And I'm gonna stop this video. There we go. I'm gonna do this here. Yes. All right, man. Another one in the books.
Yeah, we'll have to get him on again sometime in the future. And I imagine he's going to have some more requests to be on. So he really needs to get his voice out there. He is doing great work.
Yeah, total rising star. I mean, he'll be. I'm glad he was here. We can say
thanks to Chris and Steve.
Yeah, we knew Jordan back when.
Yeah.
He was on our show first. So.
Yep.
Yeah, good stuff.
Okay.
Well, I'm about ready to crack a few Coronas and hit these waves, man.
looks relaxing.
Yeah, doesn't it? I'm actually like feeling a little sad here watching this whole scene, to be honest with you. It's like, ooh, I want to be
always 5 o'clock somewhere.
But that's kind of closer to your territory, right? That's kind of like a semi-Florida scene.
Yeah, I just need my surfboard, right?
Yeah. Yeah. How far away from you are you from the ocean?
Within an hour, not too far. Yeah, I'm northeast of Orlando, so it's just a hop, skip, and a jump. Cocoa. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll be back on Sunday night with Sunday Night Astro Live. We still have a bunch of room available for the webinar tomorrow with me and Heather. You can find that over on her website, Astrology with Heather. The link is also on Facebook. So we'll be doing it's a by donation webinar. Whatever you put in the kitty is fine. Starts at I believe 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, and we're going to be looking at roughly the next 2 years astrologically and how we're going to get through this time. And Heather and I were scouting that out this morning and got a lot of really good information for people, and providing some resources for her group and our group and anybody else in between. So you got anything else you want to say today, Steve, before we sign off?
I don't think so. I mean, I do. I mean, that whole conversation just brings up so many good things to talk about. So
This is the dark feminine right here. Look into the eyes of the dark feminine right there.
there she is.
Yeah, it's a good conversation. I am going to get you a Thor hammer too.
Here, hold on. Come here.
Oh, look at that
There you
beast.
go. Here's Sasha.
Sasha.
Looks a lot like yours.
Ah, Sasha's a good
I
looking,
woke her up. She's not too happy right now.
good looking girl. Oh,
Yeah, I'll have to find a Thor hammer.
yeah, I'm going to get you a Thor hammer, man. So when it's your time to speak, you bring the thunder. Okay?
All right.
All right. Chatlandia, love you. Everybody else, same deal. Keep your head on straight. Keep your head on the swivel. Take care of yourself. Feed yourself emotionally. Feed yourself spiritually. You can get spiritually fed here every Friday on the Friday FARcast. Next week, another Floridian. My guy Sayer G is going to be with us next Friday. Totally looking forward to that. We get the Crimmies the week after that, and then going to get Sharon Rose on, Jay Widener's wife, and Sharon's her own person. They're married, right? And Sharon's really interesting, super interesting, and a qigong aficionado and filmmaker, and looking forward to having a conversation with her. We got plenty of people we're trying to bring onto the show so we can continue to feed you on Fridays, right? The Friday FARcast. So take good care of yourselves, and from the dark feminine and me right there. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to save what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Come see us on Saturday with the webinar with Heather, and Sunday night on Astro Live. Bye for now.